We say that right effort has to be made. This doesn't mean that we should just strive blindly. The mind is a very delicate instrument, and the development of the mind requires a very precise balancing of the different mental faculties. We need an alert, clear, keen degree of mindfulness to recognize what kind of mental state we're in. We also need a certain degree of wisdom to know how to keep the mind in balance, how to prevent it from veering towards extremes. This is an aspect of the middle way. It means striking the right balance in practice, knowing how to harmonize the different faculties to gain the maximum contribution from each, without doing any harm to the mind, without exhausting the mind on the one hand, without letting it go into stagnation on the other. Especially in developing energy, we have to develop the energy in a middle way, in a balanced way. And to illustrate this point, there's a certain story that's come down in the text. The Buddha had a disciple whose name was Sona. Before he became a monk, Sona had previously been a musician. He had played the veena, the Indian lute. After he took ordination as a monk, he was very eager to reach enlightenment. And so he went off into solitude and he began to practice with great enthusiasm, very strong burst of energy. He applied himself day and night, practicing meditation constantly, until after some time his mind just became restless and tense, and all of his vigor was exhausted. Then he became discouraged. He thought, no matter how hard I try, I can't get any place. Therefore, I better leave the Sangha and return to the worldly life. So he went to the Buddha. He told the Buddha that he'd done his best. He'd made a wholehearted effort to reach enlightenment, but he couldn't gain even the basic stages of mental concentration. Therefore, he said, now I'm going to leave the Sangha and return home. The Buddha approached this case very skillfully. The Buddha didn't just begin discussing his problem directly. Instead, the Buddha asked him. He said, what did you do before you became a monk? Soma said, before I became a monk, I used to be a musician. I played the lute. Then the Buddha said, tell me, when you were tuning up your lute, if you tuned the strings very tightly, what would happen? Could you play well? No, then I couldn't play the lute very well. The pitch would be too high, and sometimes the strings would break. Then the Buddha asked, when you left the strings very loose, then could you play the lute? Sona said, no. When the strings were left loose, then I would just get a dull, droning sound, and I couldn't get very good music coming from my instrument. Well then, the Buddha asked, how could you get good music from the lute? Sona answered, well, to get good music, I would tune the strings that they weren't too tight and weren't too loose. Then I could get perfect music out of the lute. The Buddha said, that's just the key to practicing the path, to be in balance, not too tight and not too loose. You shouldn't be too exertive, since that just exhausts your energies. It makes your mind tense and restless, and it leads to discouragement. On the other hand, you shouldn't be slack and negligent. If you become negligent, then you can't make any progress at all. The way to practice is according to the middle way. Balance energy with calm, then you can make progress. Sona went back to his meditation cell. He practiced the way the Buddha taught him, and in time he reached his goal and became one of the foremost outstanding disciples of the Buddha. To develop the mind further, to make it capable of gaining concentration and insight, we have to enter the practice of the next factor of the path, right mindfulness, samasati. Now, what is meant by right mindfulness? Right mindfulness is the clear awareness of what is happening in us and around us at the successive moments of experience. Mindfulness is a form of attention. To practice mindfulness involves attending to our experience. But mindfulness differs somewhat from ordinary attention. Ordinarily, attention, the faculty of attention, is used as an instrument for serving our purposes, our biological and psychological needs. Attention serves as an instrument of the rest of the mind, so that we notice what the mind demands and desires. We notice the things that serve the mind's desires. We neglect the other things. We don't attend to them. But mindfulness is a kind of attention which operates independently of all ulterior aims and purposes. Mindfulness is an attention which observes our experience carefully and precisely, always attending to what is occurring in the present, without limiting the field of observation, without making any discriminations, without subordinating the acts of attention to external purposes. Mindfulness is attention concerned only with attending, with observing what is happening in the present simply for the sake of knowing and understanding what's happening, not for the sake of serving some utilitarian end. Mindfulness is attention that functions in an atmosphere of detachment. It's attention that aspires towards a pure objectivity, an awareness which reflects the nature of objects exactly as they are, without adding to them, without elaborating upon them, without interpreting them through the screens of subjective evaluation and commentary. The Buddha divides the practice of mindfulness according to its objects into 4 groups called the 4 foundations of mindfulness. These are the mindful contemplation of the body, the mindful contemplation of feelings, the mindful contemplation of states of mind, and the mindful contemplation of mind objects. The practice of right mindfulness